The first college football playoff rankings will be revealed tomorrow night, and it's always the toughest to predict these very first rankings because, as you guys know, the committee is inconsistent. They're inconsistent week to week to some degree, but not too bad. But year to year, it's always like they always seem to value different things each year, and it's a different group of people each year. Some of the names change in the room, so it's always tough to predict that first one. So we're going to give you our best guess as to what those rankings are going to look like. But this may sound weird, but what I am looking at the most in terms of trying to figure out what this committee values is where do they rank Oregon and where do they rank Georgia Tech. Those two teams are very interesting because both teams have one loss. Neither team really has a very good resume. They really haven't beaten anyone. I mean, Oregon's best win is probably Northwestern. And then you look at Georgia Tech, their best win is probably Duke. So they don't really have any quality wins. There's two differences, though, with these teams. First of all, their loss. Oregon lost to Indiana, who's going to be a top 5 team. And then you look at Georgia Tech, they lost to NC State. That's a team that's not going to be anywhere near the rankings. So their losses are much different. And then also, Oregon has been more dominant. So how much does that matter? That's really, I think it's very interesting. I think there's going to be a pretty big gap between Oregon and Georgia Tech. But how big of a gap? And again, I think that tells you how much are they valuing the loss, who you lost to, and also how dominant have you been in your games, because Georgia Tech's had a lot of close games. So that's kind of the two teams that I'm looking at to give us the biggest indication of what this committee is valuing. There will be other things in there as well. But this is my best guess. And I'm going to, at the end of the video, show you how I think the rankings should look. So I did the rankings the way I've been doing them every week. And then after that, I tried to add in the brand bias, the SEC bias, all of that I believe the committee is going to use. And so that's why I shifted some things around. And not much. I think they're going to do a pretty good job, but we'll see. All right, so we're going to start at the bottom. I think James Madison and Memphis will be ranked just because they're going to want to put some group of 5 teams in there. They've done this in the past. They've randomly thrown them in at the bottom. I really do think it is because they need a group of 5 champion to be ranked at the end of the season. And so if they have a couple teams in there, it'll be easy for them to justify having that group of 5 team, that champion in the, because let's say South Florida beats Memphis in the American Championship. Well, then they could say, well, they beat a top 25 and they can move them in. So I think they will have at least one of these teams ranked. I think they probably both do deserve to be ranked. I mean, at this point, the teams behind them really just don't have much of a resume, and these teams only have one loss. So I'm perfectly fine with them being ranked. I think Washington will be ranked at number 23. Another team that is really kind of lacking a resume. You look at, they've got wins over Maryland and Illinois. Those are decent wins. I think they're good enough to get them ranked. Also losses to Ohio State and Michigan. Those are top 25 teams. So I think Washington will be ranked. I think Cincinnati will be number 22 at 7-2, coming off of a tough loss, obviously. But they've got some decent wins. Iowa State, UCF, Kansas, Baylor. They've piled up some not great wins, but pretty good wins. And that Nebraska loss was week 1, and now they just lost to Utah, who I think is going to be ranked for sure. And then Georgia Tech. I think they're going to be all the way down at number 21. Again, when you look at the resume, there's just not. And Duke's their best win. Wake Forest is now a 4-loss team, so that win does not look as good as maybe it did. And then their loss coming to NC State. I think they're going to get penalized for that. We'll see. Some teams that I don't think will be ranked, and I think people will probably be talking about. I think you look at Houston because of the loss to West Virginia. That probably keeps them out. And Pittsburgh's kind of in the same situation. They lost to West Virginia. And these teams just don't really have great wins. Iowa, I know people are probably going to expect them to be ranked. They have a blowout win over Minnesota, but that is it. I mean, they just haven't beaten anyone else. And I know the one loss came to Indiana, and they played them close, and that's great. But then they also lost to Iowa State, who is now, a 4-loss team. So, I don't think there's going to be enough there for them to wind up in the top 25. So that's how I'm viewing the bottom. Now let's move on to 16 through 20. I think Missouri is in at number 20, another team that really does not have much of a resume. They just don't. I mean, they haven't beaten anyone. I mean, Kansas, probably their best win. Auburn, I mean, they just haven't beaten anyone, but they lost to Alabama and Vanderbilt, so I think the committee's probably going to rank them pretty high because they lost to two pretty good SEC teams. I think that's too high. That's just one team you'll see when I show you what I think the ranking should look like, that I think should be lower. I do have them ranked, but not quite this high. Then you've got Michigan, top 25 win over Washington and win over Nebraska. Losses to Oklahoma and USC. These are two teams that should be ranked. USC just ahead of them at 6-2. I think they have to be ahead of them because they beat them head-to-head. Also beat Nebraska now. Losses to Illinois and Notre Dame. But that's a pretty strong resume compared to some of these other two-loss teams. Ahead of them, I've got Utah at 7-2. I think this team maybe should be a little bit higher than this. Utah, though, blowout wins over Cincinnati and Arizona State, losses to Texas Tech and BYU. So their two losses came to top 10 teams, and they've got convincing wins over pretty good teams. I mean, I think you can make an argument for Utah to be in the top 15, but I think they're going to be at 17. Notre Dame at number 16. I think the head-to-head game is going to catch up to them because you're going to have Miami has to be ahead of them. Louisville has to be ahead of Miami. And so that's why I think you see Notre Dame down at number 16. All right, 11 through 15. Miami, just talked about them because they beat Notre Dame. I think they have to be ahead of them. Still a pretty strong resume for the Hurricanes despite the two losses. Vanderbilt at number 14. I think that this is a team that has Missouri and LSU on the resume and losses to Alabama and Texas. I think Texas is going to be ranked pretty high. You see, I have Texas just ahead of Oklahoma at 12 and 13. That's where I've got those two teams. They beat them head to head. I think this is too high for Oklahoma because you look at Oklahoma's resume. They've got Michigan and they've got Tennessee. Tennessee's now a 3-loss team. Those are not bad. I mean, those are solid wins, but I don't know if it's quite enough to put them. I guess this is probably a pretty good spot. I don't know. Now that I'm looking at it, I guess they're actually in a similar spot to Vanderbilt. So being ranked near Vanderbilt's actually probably pretty accurate. Then we've got Louisville at number 11. That win over Miami, I think, really helps them. And the fact they've only got one loss. This Louisville team has wins over Pittsburgh and Miami. Those are two-loss teams. And the only loss coming to Virginia, who is, I think, going to be a top 10 team. Let's just move ahead because Virginia beat Louisville head-to-head. I think they go to number 10 at 8-1. The resume isn't the strongest, but it's decent. You look at the win over Louisville. They've got wins over Florida State and Cal. They went on the road and beat Cal. And then, again, you wonder, how much is the committee going to look at the losses? Because they did lose to NC State. So it would not shock me if Virginia is actually below Louisville and maybe even below Miami. I could see them, depending on how much they value who you lost to. That is another team that's going to be interesting to see where they get ranked. But yeah, I think they're probably going to be in the top 10 because of that win over Louisville. Texas Tech at number 9. This is a team that is 8-1. They've got a pretty strong resume. BYU undefeated number 8. Oregon, Ole Miss at 6. I actually think BYU should be higher. I'll show you that in just a second. But I think brand bias is going to matter here. You got the SEC and the Big Ten, Ole Miss, Oregon. The perception is that these are top teams, even though the resumes aren't that strong. Oregon's resume is not that strong. I think BYU should be ahead of both of them. Again, when you compare the resumes, it's not that much different, and BYU is undefeated. These other teams have a loss. So that's something I think they're going to get wrong, but this is what I think they're going to do. And this is what I think they're going to do the top 5. I think they'll get the top 5 right. I know a lot of people talk about Texas A&M's resume. I actually don't think Texas A&M has a better resume. If we're just going by wins, and again, when I do my spreadsheet, I put the teams in columns of 1 loss, 2 loss, 3 loss in terms of who you've beaten. And I understand there are 3-loss teams that are better than 2-loss teams, but it's just a way to kind of visualize it. And I have heard the committee talk about, they have so many wins over teams above 500 or whatever. So I think that they do look at that. But you go with wins over teams with 1 loss. Oregon, Indiana beat Oregon. That's the only win for these 3 teams. Then you go to teams with 2 losses. Oregon has one over Iowa. Ohio State has 2 of those with Washington and Texas. Texas A&M only has 1 with Notre Dame. So that is really the difference in these teams when you look. Then you can go even further, look at the 3-loss teams. Indiana has 1 with a win over Illinois. Ohio State has 2, Illinois and Minnesota. Texas A&M only has 1 with LSU. So I think that it's pretty clear that Texas A&M will be 3. It's just a matter of how much do they value that one really good win for Indiana with Oregon on there versus Ohio State being more dominant with wins over Washington, Illinois, Minnesota. You know, that's going to be interesting to see. How much does the eye test come in? All of that. If they really value resume, though, I think Indiana will be number one. If they are going a little bit more by the eye test, I think Ohio State is at 1, and I think regardless, Texas A&M will be at number 3. If Texas A&M is 1 or 2, then there's some SEC bias in this committee, because again, I just gave you the resumes. They don't have a resume quite as good as Indiana and Ohio State, and I would argue they maybe haven't been quite as dominant either. Again, it's going to be interesting. And I think Alabama and Georgia, those are pretty obvious. I think they will definitely be at 4 and 5. They've got really strong resumes for one-loss teams. Their resumes are good enough. They're that much better than BYU's that I actually think they should be ranked ahead of an undefeated BYU, even though with Ole Miss and Oregon, I think maybe BYU should get the nod. So yeah, let's just look at how I think the rankings should look. And so if I was doing my normal top 25 video, this is how it would look. Indiana 1, Ohio State 2, Texas A&M 3, Alabama 4, and at number 5 is Georgia. So I think the committee is going to get the top 5 right. But then I'd have BYU at 6. I'd have Oregon a little bit lower at number 9. Again, their resume is really lacking, but they did lose to the number 1 team in the country. I had Oklahoma a little bit lower, but again, as I was going through that video, I don't know if there's really that much difference between Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. So I don't know. You know, you could say that Vanderbilt played Texas really close on the road. Ole Miss kind of got blown out by, or excuse me, Oklahoma kind of got blown out by Texas. So that's one thing to look at. And then you look at Vanderbilt with wins over Missouri and LSU, Oklahoma with wins over Michigan and Tennessee. It's pretty even. So maybe I should either drop Vanderbilt just ahead of Oklahoma or move Oklahoma ahead of Miami. That's just something I'm looking at now. I don't know. I really don't know what I was thinking when I did that. But anyways, USC 18, Michigan 19. I think Georgia Tech a little bit higher than how so the gap between Oregon and Georgia Tech, like I talked about, I've got it at 9 and 20. So 11 spots in between. That's what I've got. But I think the committee is going to have that gap a little bit higher. I think it's going to be number 7 and number 21. So 14 spots different. That is what I'm looking at. I know that sounds weird, but that's kind of one of those things I'm looking at. And again, I think Memphis or Missouri is a little bit too high, but overall, I do think the committee is going to be pretty accurate, and just a few things that I think will be a little bit off. So where's the surprise? There's going to be one. Who do they have way too high? Who do they have way too low? We'll find out tomorrow night. I'd love to get your thoughts and what you think the ranking is going to look like. Let me know down in the comments below.